What if everything you thought you knew about Todd Tucker and Kandi was only half the story? Because right now, the internet is spiraling over claims that are way darker, way messier, and honestly, way more uncomfortable than your average reality TV drama. We're not talking about petty arguments or shady confessional interviews. No, this time. The whispers coming out of the Real Housewives of Atlanta universe are hitting a whole different level. Imagine being in a marriage where the power balance isn't just about money, but control. Where fun behind closed doors suddenly starts sounding a lot less mutual. And now, of nowhere, Todd is allegedly flipping the entire narrative, hinting that those wild rumors fans laughed about for years. Yeah, they might not have been jokes at all, but here's the real question. Is this a man finally telling his truth? Or a perfectly timed storyline designed to rewrite history? Because if even a fraction of these claims are real, then what we're looking at isn't just reality TV drama anymore. It's something much deeper and way more explosive than anyone expected. The story doesn't begin with a confession. It begins with a shift, a subtle one at first, the kind you only notice if you've been paying attention to The Real Housewives of Atlanta long enough to recognize when something feels off. Because for years, the narrative around Kandi and Todd Tucker was almost too clean, too polished. She was the powerhouse, the business mogul, the one with the empire. And he was the supportive husband, the laid-back guy who somehow found himself inside one of the most successful reality TV machines in the world. On the surface, it worked. It made sense. It looked like a power couple dynamic that just happened to come with a little extra drama on the side. But here's where things start to crack. Because while the cameras were busy capturing arguments about money, family interference, and respect, there was always this other layer. The one people joked about but never fully unpacked. The one that turned into memes, side comments, and late-night Twitter threads. The whispers about what really went on behind closed doors. And for the longest time, those whispers stayed exactly that. Background noise. Until now. Because suddenly, Todd isn't just the quiet husband anymore. He's not the guy brushing things off or laughing through uncomfortable moments. Now, he's allegedly telling a completely different story. A story where the dynamic wasn't balanced. Where the control didn't just stop at finances or public image. According to the narrative that's been building, the real tension lives somewhere far more private. Somewhere that doesn't show up neatly in a reunion episode. And if you've been watching closely, this isn't as random as it sounds. Think back to how often Todd's position in that relationship was questioned. Not just by fans, but by people inside Kandi's own circle. There was always this underlying tone, this idea that he was lucky to be there, that he was benefiting more than he was contributing. And whether people meant it as a joke or not, hearing that over and over again does something. It chips away at perception. It creates a narrative before you even get a chance to tell your own side. And let's not pretend that didn't play out on screen. The tension with Mama Joyce wasn't just a minor disagreement. It was a full-blown storyline. Accusations, confrontations, moments that made it very clear Todd was never fully accepted. He was questioned, tested, sometimes openly disrespected. And in those moments, people expected Kandi to step in, to defend, to balance things out. But more often than not, she stayed neutral. Or at least, that's how it looked. Now, on its own, that might just sound like typical reality TV conflict. Families not getting along, partners feeling misunderstood. It happens all the time. But when you start layering that with what's being hinted at now, the story starts to feel very different. Because according to the version that's quietly making its way through blogs and commentary channels, the imbalance didn't stop when the cameras turned off. It's being suggested that the same control people thought existed in business and public life may have extended into their private relationship as well. And that's where things get complicated. Because suddenly, those old rumors people laughed about don't feel so harmless anymore. They start to look like pieces of a bigger puzzle that nobody really wanted to solve. Remember when the whole situation involving Portia Williams exploded? At the time, it felt chaotic, messy, almost unbelievable. Allegations about propositions, wild nights, and a so-called dungeon that sounded more like a storyline than reality. Fans picked sides. Some believed Portia. Others defended Kandi. And eventually, like most reality TV scandals, it faded into the background as the next drama took over. But what if that wasn't the full story? What if that moment was just a glimpse into something much bigger? Because now, the narrative that's being pushed suggests that those situations weren't isolated incidents. That there may have been a pattern. And more importantly, that not everyone involved experienced those situations the same way. And that's where Todd's alleged perspective changes everything. Because if he's now positioning himself as someone who wasn't entirely comfortable with certain dynamics, it flips the entire conversation. Suddenly, it's not about who was more adventurous or who initiated what. It becomes a question of consent, of pressure, of whether the public image of a fun, open relationship was actually hiding something far more complicated now. Before anyone jumps to conclusions, it's important to understand how these narratives evolve. In the world of reality TV, perception is everything. A single comment can turn into a headline. A rumor can grow legs overnight. And once a storyline takes hold, it's almost impossible to separate fact from exaggeration. But even with that in mind, there's a reason this particular narrative is gaining traction. It's because it connects. Dots people didn't realize were connected before. The financial imbalance. The constant questioning of Todd's role. The public disrespect. The rumors about their private life. On their own, each of these things might not mean much. But together, they start to paint a picture. Not a clear one, not a confirmed one, but a compelling one. And then there's the timing. Because, let's be honest, stories like this don't just resurface out of nowhere. There's always a trigger. A moment that pushes things from private tension into public conversation. In this case, it seems to be the breakdown of the marriage itself. Because when relationships fall apart, especially ones that have been under a microscope for years, people start talking. Sides start forming. And narratives start shifting, according to what's being discussed. Todd's alleged claims aren't just random accusations. They're being framed as explanations. As context for decisions that didn't make sense before. Like the cheating allegations. At the time, people saw that as betrayal. As proof that Todd was taking advantage of a situation. But now there's an attempt to reframe that narrative. To suggest that maybe there were underlying issues that weren't visible to the public, and whether that's true or not. It's a powerful shift, because it changes how people interpret everything that came before. Moments that seemed straightforward suddenly feel layered. Conversations that looked one-sided now seem incomplete. And the idea of who held power in that relationship becomes a lot less obvious. But here's where things get even more complicated. Because while Todd's alleged perspective is gaining attention, Kandi's side of the story hasn't disappeared. If anything, it stands in direct contrast to what's being suggested now. Her public image has always been consistent, confident, in control. Open about her lifestyle, but never apologetic for it. And for many fans, that transparency is exactly why they trust her version of events. So now, we're left with two completely different narratives. One that suggests control and pressure behind closed doors. And another that frames everything as consensual, mutual, and blown out of proportion by outsiders. And somewhere in the middle of those two versions is the truth. Or at least something closer to it. The problem is, in a situation like this, the truth isn't always what gets the most attention. It's the most dramatic version. The one that raises the most questions. The one that keeps people talking. And right now, that version is the one that paints this relationship as something far more intense than anyone originally thought. Because if the rumors continue to build, and if more details start to emerge, this could go from being just another reality TV scandal to something much bigger. Something that forces people to reevaluate not just this relationship, but the way these kinds of dynamics are presented in the public eye. And the most unsettling part is that we might only be at the beginning of this story. Because if there's one thing reality TV has taught us, it's that the first version of events is rarely the final one. There are always more layers, more perspectives, more revelations waiting to surface. So the question isn't just what happened between Todd and Kandi. The question is how much of it we never really understood in the first place. And if the narrative continues to shift the way it is right now, the version of their relationship that people accepted for years might end up looking completely unrecognizable by the time all of this plays out. And if that version starts to unravel, then everything people thought they understood about this relationship begins to feel a lot less certain. Because now the conversation isn't just about what happened. It's about who controlled the narrative the entire time. And that's where things start getting even messier. Because behind the scenes, according to what's now circulating, there are alleged details that paint a picture far more calculated than anyone expected. Not confirmed, not officially documented, but repeated enough across blogs, commentary pages, and so-called insider circles that people are starting to pay attention. And the story being whispered isn't just about a couple with differences. It's about a dynamic that may have been carefully managed for public consumption while something completely different was happening in private. The claim being pushed is that Todd Tucker wasn't just dealing with a strong, successful partner in Kandi Burruss. He was allegedly dealing with someone who set the rules, controlled the environment, and expected those rules to be followed without question. And again, this is where things move out of the realm of typical reality TV drama and into something that feels a lot more complicated. Because if you look back at how their relationship was presented on The Real Housewives of Atlanta, there were always subtle hints of imbalance. Not in a way that screamed dysfunction, but enough to make you pause if you were really watching. Kandi was always decisive, direct, unapologetic, and those traits are often celebrated. But when you place them in the context of a marriage where the other person is constantly being questioned, doubted, or minimized, the dynamic starts to shift. Now add to that the resurfacing conversations about their private life. The same rumors that once felt like exaggerated gossip are now being re-examined through a different lens. And suddenly, what used to sound like they're just a little wild is being reframed as something more structured, more intentional. Almost like a system that operated on its own set of rules, according to the narrative that's gaining traction. There were allegedly expectations placed on Todd that went beyond what he was comfortable with. Situations that were presented as normal within their relationship but may not have felt that way to him. And the most talked about part of these claims revolves around the idea that certain experiences weren't entirely mutual, even if they were portrayed that way publicly now. This is where the story leans heavily into speculation, because there are no official documents, no confirmed interviews laying this out in detail. What exists are interpretations, alleged accounts, pieces of information that have been stitched together into a narrative that feels believable enough to spread, but not solid enough to confirm. And yet, despite that uncertainty, people are locked in. Because the story taps into something bigger than just this one relationship. It taps into the idea of power behind closed doors. The kind that doesn't always look obvious from the outside. The kind that can exist even in relationships that appear successful, glamorous, and enviable. And once that idea is introduced, it changes how every past moment is viewed. Take the public reactions, for example. Social media didn't just react to these claims, it amplified them. Some people immediately sided with Todd, framing him as someone who had been overlooked or misunderstood for years. Others dismissed the entire narrative as a convenient attempt to rewrite history, especially given the timing and the fact that their relationship had already been under strain. There were even so-called anonymous insiders popping up in comment sections and blog posts, claiming to have witnessed things firsthand. Of course, none of these sources could be verified, but that didn't stop the speculation. In fact, it fueled it. Because in the world of viral commentary, the less concrete the information is, the more room there is for interpretation. And the more room there is for interpretation, the more the story grows. Some of these alleged insiders painted a picture of a lifestyle that was far more curated than it appeared on television. They claimed that what viewers saw was only a fraction of what actually happened, that certain dynamics were intentionally softened for the cameras, while others were completely left out. And whether those claims hold any truth or not, they've added another layer to an already complicated narrative. Then there's the financial aspect, which people can't seem to stop bringing up, because in many ways, money sits at the center of this entire situation. Kandi Burruss has always been open about her success, her businesses, her investments, her ability to generate income across multiple streams. And for a long time, that was seen as empowering. But now, some are questioning whether that financial dominance also translated into control within the relationship. The idea being suggested is that when one person holds significantly more financial power, it can influence decision-making in ways that aren't always obvious. That it can create an environment where the other person feels pressured to go along with things they might not fully agree with. Again, this is not confirmed, but it's a theory that people are running with, especially in light of the current narrative. And then, just when it feels like the story couldn't get more layered, the cheating allegations come back into focus. Because suddenly they're not being viewed in isolation anymore. They're being tied into this larger narrative as either a reaction or a consequence. Some are arguing that if Todd did step outside the marriage, it may have been because he felt disconnected or unheard within it. Others are pushing back, saying that cheating is a choice, regardless of the circumstances, and that back and forth is exactly what keeps this story alive, because there's no clear resolution. No definitive answer that settles the debate. Just a series of claims, counterclaims, and interpretations that continue to evolve as more people weigh in. What makes it even more intense is the way public opinion seems to shift almost in real time. One moment, the narrative leans heavily in one direction. The next, a new piece of information surfaces and everything tilts the other way. It's like watching a pendulum swing back and forth, never quite settling in one place. And through all of this, the one thing that remains constant is the sense that there's more to the story than what's being said. That for every detail that becomes public, there are others that remain hidden. And that's what keeps people hooked. Not just the drama, but the possibility that the truth, whatever it may be, hasn't fully come out yet, because if there's one thing this situation proves, it's that perception can only hold for so long before it starts to crack. And right now, those cracks are becoming impossible to ignore. And as those cracks continue to spread, the entire situation starts to feel less like a simple celebrity breakup and more like a slow burn unraveling of a story that was never fully understood in the first place. Because by the time the rumors, reactions, and counter-reactions have circled the internet for weeks, something strange begins to happen. The narrative stops being about a single allegation and starts. It's becoming a full-blown investigation in the court of public opinion. And in that court, everyone suddenly becomes a detective. People start revisiting old episodes of The Real Housewives of Atlanta like they're studying evidence. Clips that once looked like harmless reality TV drama are suddenly being replayed frame by frame. Viewers are pointing out facial expressions, awkward pauses, moments where Todd Tucker seemed quiet while Kandi Burruss took control of a conversation. Were those just normal couple dynamics? Or were they subtle hints of something deeper? Suddenly, everything is being reinterpreted. A joke from years ago now sounds like a clue. A tense dinner scene now feels like a warning sign. Even the way Todd sometimes laughed off uncomfortable comments is now being dissected, like it meant something bigger. And whether those interpretations are fair or not, they're spreading fast. Because once the internet senses drama with layers, it doesn't just watch the story unfold. It digs, it speculates. It builds entire theories around the smallest details. Some online commentators are even claiming that the reason this story exploded the way it did is because people have always been curious about the private life of Kandi Burruss. She has never hidden the fact that she built an entire brand around intimacy and adult relationships. That openness made her stand out on television. It made her confident. But now critics are saying that the same openness also created an environment where rumors could grow without limits. And when those rumors are suddenly connected to a husband who might feel overshadowed, the situation becomes a perfect storm for controversy, because if Todd's alleged perspective is even partially accurate, it suggests that the marriage many fans admired might have been balancing on tension for years. Not explosive tension. Not the kind that immediately ends a relationship, but the slow kind, the quiet resentment that builds over time when one partner feels unheard or outmatched. That's the angle some commentators are leaning into now. They're saying the real story here isn't about a scandalous headline. It's about a relationship where two very strong personalities may have slowly drifted into completely different emotional spaces. And when that happens, the fallout can get messy, especially when fame, money, and television cameras are involved. Because once the marriage reached a breaking point, everything that had been quietly tolerated suddenly became part of the argument. Old frustrations resurface. Private disagreements become public talking points. And the narrative that once protected both sides starts breaking apart piece by piece. That's exactly where the story seems to be now. Some reports suggest that conversations about legal steps and financial separation have already been quietly discussed behind the scenes. Not necessarily dramatic courtroom battles, but the kind of complicated negotiations that happen when two high-profile people untangle years of shared business, property, and reputation. When that process starts, the stakes get even higher, because suddenly it's not just about emotions anymore. It's about assets, public image, brand identity, everything both people built during the relationship. And that's when speculation about investigations and financial consequences begins to creep into the conversation. Online gossip channels have already started throwing around phrases like contract, disputes, business complications, and brand damage. None of it confirmed, of course. But the possibility alone is enough to keep viewers glued to the story. Because if a public breakup turns into a financial or legal battle, the drama moves to an entirely different level. And then there's the public backlash factor. Reality TV fans can be loyal, but they can also be brutally divided. One half of the audience believes Todd is finally speaking up after years of being underestimated. They argue that anyone in a relationship where they feel overshadowed would eventually reach a breaking point. To them, this story looks like someone reclaiming their voice after staying quiet for too long. The other half sees something very different. They see a man who might be attempting to reshape the narrative. After mistakes of his own, a man who faced cheating accusations and now might be trying to redirect the conversation by raising uncomfortable questions about the past. That split in public opinion is exactly why this story refuses to die down. Every new rumor sparks another wave of arguments online. Every interview clip or resurfaced moment from the show becomes a new debate. And the truth is, both sides of the conversation have just enough evidence to keep their theories alive, which means the situation stays unresolved. And unresolved stories are the ones that keep people watching, because at the center of all this, speculation is still the same unanswered question that started the entire conversation. What was really happening behind the scenes of a marriage that millions of viewers thought they understood? Was it simply a case of two successful people struggling to balance fame and personal life? Or was there a deeper dynamic that only now is starting to come into focus? The reality might be far less dramatic than the rumors suggest. Relationships fall apart every day for reasons that never make headlines. Sometimes the truth is just incompatibility, exhaustion, and years of pressure finally catching up. But in the world of reality television, the simplest explanation rarely wins the spotlight. The spotlight goes to the version of the story that feels explosive, the one that raises eyebrows and keeps audiences guessing. And right now, that spotlight is shining directly on Todd Tucker and Kandi Burruss, whether the rumors fade away or new revelations appear. One thing is almost guaranteed. The public conversation around their relationship isn't ending anytime soon. Because once a story like this enters the reality TV universe, it becomes part of the larger drama that fans follow year after year. And if there really are more details waiting to surface, the narrative could shift again in ways nobody expects, because the one lesson reality television keeps proving over and over again is that the final chapter of a scandal is rarely the one people hear. So now the story is out there, the rumors are louder than ever, and the narrative is shifting right in front of everyone's eyes. But the real question is, what do you actually believe? Is Todd Tucker finally speaking his truth after years of staying in the background? Or is this just a perfectly timed move to flip the script and control the narrative? And what about Kandi Burruss's? She being unfairly dragged into a story that's been exaggerated beyond recognition. Or is there a side of this relationship the public was never meant to see? Because if there's one thing we've learned from the Real Housewives of Atlanta, it's that the real drama never fully plays out on camera. There's always another layer, another version, another secret waiting to come out. So I need you to tell me, whose side are you on? Do you think this is truth finally coming to light? Or just another messy chapter in a reality TV breakup? Drop your thoughts in the comments, don't hold back, and if you want more deep dives into stories like this, make sure you like this video, subscribe, and stay tuned. Because something tells me this situation is far from over.